Hello and welcome to the last day of the conference, Unsettled Europe, States and Politics in Southeast Europe. I'm here with Dane Taleski from the Southeast European University in Skopje. Dane had his presentation yesterday, and you talked a little bit about both how Macedonia handled the crisis, how the Balkan route generally functioned and worked, but most importantly also the relationship between the countries of the Western Balkans and the EU. How would you say was this main relationship or pressures from the EU, and how did the Balkan countries, or more specifically Macedonia, react to it? And how do you think EU's role could have been better or more well constructed, let's say?
Well, thanks first of all for giving me the opportunity to reiterate my work, not only in the panel but also in this interview. My work, the chapter that I presented, will be published in a forthcoming book called Escaping the Escape by the Bertelsmann Foundation. Looked at the duality of the Western Balkan in terms of that it was a transit route during the migrants and refugee crisis, but this also an area from which migrants originate and go to transfer or to immigrate to Western Europe. The role of the EU has been suboptimal and less than expected during the refugee crisis. First of all, because there was a lack of cohesion within the European Union, and there was a lack of common foreign policy on the migration issues. It has to be said that the emergence of the Western Balkan route was a failure of the EU policy. There was a policy in place called so-called Dublin rules, which were not implemented, and EU member states didn't oblige to it, and this caused the emergence of the Western Balkan route. And then within the EU there were two sets of answers, or two sets of attitudes how to handle the crisis. One was the attitude of the Visegrad group, most vocally led by Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, who advocated a policy of so-called fortress Europe, that the borders should be shut and the migrants should not be let to go forward in the European Union. And the second one was the position pushed forward by Germany, which was a more opening policy towards the migrants and letting them in, and then giving them asylum and refugee status if they deserved so. What came helpful in these two polarized positions within the European Union were two things. First of all, Germany led negotiations with Turkey and the EU-Turkey agreement on the refugee crisis. This helped de-escalate the movement. And what was second, not that we are sitting in Graz, but was the role of the Austrian government. They had a very prominent role in terms of creating an enabling environment and facilitating a dialogue between the Western Balkan countries, which allowed them to coordinate their policy responses in terms of improving border management, in terms of creating a unified procedure and technical standards how to deal with the transit of refugees throughout the status, and at the end calling the conference in Vienna on which the Western Balkan route decision was taken for the Western Balkan route to be closed. Now, it's dubious whether the Western Balkan route is closed, but it's for sure that the transit of migrants the number of people that were transited seriously was de-escalated.
Yesterday, after your talk, there was this dilemma of are the Western Balkan countries acting as good Europeans or bad Europeans? Can you reflect a little bit more on that, on how, for example, several of the leaders of countries of the Western Balkans tried in a way to kind of flirt with this idea of we are European, therefore we obey whatever comes from Europe, from the EU. Can you reflect a little bit on that relationship?
Yeah, first there is a contradiction and controversy in terms of the definitions what is good and bad European. For some, a good European is the one that erects fences and prevents the migrants to come in. For others, that's a bad European. So we have to bear that in mind, that the definition of good and bad turns to, it's not that easy to define what is good and bad. What is good for some people, for example, allowing the migrants to come in Europe and aid them is bad for others. But it's unquestionable that leaders in the Western Balkans, particularly the prime ministers or the former prime minister of Macedonia, Nikola Gruevski, and the acting prime minister of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, behaved in the crisis in a way that they were scapegoating the refugees, or using the way that they handled the crisis. They used it to improve their political position and to build political allies in the Western Europe. So their response towards the crisis was to primarily cater to their interest of increasing their political relevance in Brussels and European capitals, and not to allow for a smooth transit of the people or to give them more substantial humanitarian aid.
Lastly, you also proposed some policy implications or policy recommendations, which are, in your view, the policies that EU and the Western Balkan countries could take in the future in order to...
Well, I would say there are three sets of answers. First, the Western Balkan countries need to work more in increasing social cohesion to lower the number of migrants, of people that want to leave these countries, and they have to work closer together. If there is a new wave of migrants coming, they have to foster the cross-border cooperation, and they already have sound basis for that. In between the European Union and the Western Balkans, there has to be more cooperation in terms of allowing legal labor mobility and allowing for brain circulation. This would help the countries of the Western Balkans to develop, and it would sustain their EU integration efforts. And finally, on the side of the European Union, it is facing a lot of crises. One of them is this increased perception of a threat and a security crisis, and that has to be answered. And the best way to answer it is to foster and sustain EU enlargement, or the EU accession process with the Western Balkan has to continue. And I'm not advocating for taking everybody in as the way they are, but the EU should consider sectoral and functional integration of the Western Balkans. For example, if a new wave of migrant comes, then I think it goes without the saying that the existing policy instruments from the European Union, like the Frontex, border management, or more resources given to the Western Balkan countries, are a necessity in order for stability, security, and the well-being of Europe to be continued. So in that sense, the EU, with all these problems and challenges, has to find energy and courage to allow the Western Balkans to become a functional part of the European Union.
Well, on that note, I would like to thank you for being with us here today and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, always great to be here.